Hello again. As I mentioned in the previous post, there are some movies that are difficult to know exactly how you're supposed to take them because of some factor or another. With The Messenger, it was the oddity of the story. There was a movie that came out the end of this year that had a very odd story, a very peculiar story, but also had the very unfortunate stigma, I'm not sure stigma is the right word, but it almost is in this case, of being the final film of a recently acclaimed actor. The final screen performance for Heath Ledger was in this year's release by Terry Gilliam, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. And Gilliam, sadly, has probably the worst luck of any director out there. He is an extremely imaginative man. If nothing else, you watch any one of his movies and you will be impressed by the imagination on display. Even if you hate the movie, you'll have to admit, well, wow, that's interesting. But he's had some bad luck. Very, very few of his movies have been smooth sailing from the standpoint of not having to fight the studio. Of all his movies, I think 12 Monkeys was probably the only one that was an actual box office hit. I think The Fisher King did fairly well. Fear and Loathing didn't do much in the box office, but the critics loved it for the most part. So those films did fairly well. Brazil, I think, had a rough reception, but it's become a classic over time. It's considered a classic over time. Those films are all definitely highly acclaimed films nowadays. And, of course, Gilliam co-directed Monty Python the Holy Grail, which is the greatest comedy ever produced. He was the one American member of Monty Python. But other than that, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which I admittedly still haven't seen, has always had an unusual reputation. Time Bandits was another one that was an odd movie. And then, of course, Tidelands came out. I haven't seen that one yet either, but Tidelands, I have very rarely seen a movie by an acclaimed director that was so thoroughly ripped by the critics. And then there was the famous case of Lost in La Mancha. He tried to do a Don Quixote movie starring Johnny Depp that was beset by one issue after another until they pulled the plug on the project. I have not yet seen the documentary based on it. I'd like to. I'll bet it would be interesting and informative. But those were nothing to having your star die in the middle of your film. And the late Ledger, unfortunately, that's what happened. He filmed the London scenes, and before the production was resumed, he was found dead. So you can't watch Parnassus without thinking about that and thinking about, well, what could have happened? And the unfortunate thing is that what they ended up doing with the movie probably ended up saving the movie in a lot of ways. Because I will say this, Heath Ledger has not gotten enough credit for this role. He is a unlikable character. He is very much a con man. He plays an actor. He's not paid to act, but he plays an actor because he's playing a con man running from his past, and he plays an actor who's not entirely skilled. You can tell when he's lying through his teeth, and I think that was intentional. So it's hard to judge his final performance, especially because it was unfinished. Of course, Gilliam had the brilliant thought. Gotta give him props for doing what he could, of recasting the role and incorporating it into the script, and he does beautifully. He seamlessly incorporated into the script, and there is a scene, too brief scene, with Johnny Depp as the character. There's a longer scene, which was remarkably effective, of Jude Law, and then finally Colin Farrell. And Farrell takes it to the end. He finishes the story for the character. All of them do a very, very, very good job inhabiting that character. And you gotta give Ledger props for making a full enough character that they could riff off of him and make it work. Although this is one of the reasons, for example, that the film got reamed when it wasn't up for makeup. Not only the makeup that Christopher Plummer goes through as Dr. Parnassus, but the fact that they managed to make Depp, Farrell, and even Jude Law all look like the same person. But they don't look the same, you can tell. But you tell more from their facial mannerisms than from the way they actually look. Which you gotta give the makeup department props for that. Jeez. But anyway, Plummer is solid. He plays an immortal. He made a pact a long time ago with a man who calls himself Mr. Nick. And Dr. Parnassus made a pact for immortality and for certain powers. That's how the Imaginarium works. He goes into a trance. People basically go into his brain, if you will. But it's their imagination made through him, if that makes sense. Because he believes in stories and storytelling. And that's the wager he made with Mr. Nick, is that storytelling will keep the world alive, basically. It's an intriguing premise and well done. And Christopher Plummer should have gotten a lot more props for his performance. And as Mr. Nick, Tom Waits is an underrated actor. And I have to say, he's one of the better devil characters I've ever seen in a movie. As Plummer's babyface daughter, Lily Cole, did an excellent job too. Alan Garfield and Vern Troyer round out the troupe. And yes, Vern Troyer also does a good job. Alan Garfield does a great job, but he plays such an unlikable character. I hated the character. You pull for Mr. Nick more than you pull for Anton, which is Garfield's character. Overall, solid effort from Terry Gilliam. You can't look at it, unfortunately, without that tragic what could have been. But it was well made. And I'm impressed that the movie was up for 2 Oscars. It is the only movie I've seen so far in the costume category, which is odd. I still think Public Enemies got reamed, and I really think Where the Wild Things Are got reamed in that category. But I'll have to watch the others and see how they do. I have Bright Star, Coco Before Chanel, and The Young Victoria are on my watch list for the coming couple weeks. 9, if I can get it. If I can get to see 9, I'll see it, but I'm not holding my breath at this point. I guess that's all I got to say on that movie. Watch it. It is worth watching at least once. And in typical Gilliam fashion, it's worth watching more than once. I look forward to seeing it again. Preferably on Blu-ray, because this is one of the few movies I think is a Blu-ray movie. Also got reamed, incidentally, in a couple of the other categories. The score, for one. It's got a great score. But anyway, give the movie a go, and I'll be back soon with my take on a couple of other movies that just recently seen.